Hey everyone, welcome into MLS Digest. We're previewing Week 29 action coming your way this weekend, and it's a loaded slate. Leagues Cup isn't over yet. We have the quarterfinals after this weekend's matches in the midweek following, but a little bit more normalcy in this end of the season stretch that we are now getting into, as most teams have under 10 games remaining and still so many spots on the line for making the playoffs. A lot of games really going to matter here in the final couple of months of the regular season. And there's so many storylines going into this week, with a lot of transfers finally being able to play, getting their visas, and more big names potentially getting their first starts, such as Heung-min Son for LAFC. He made his debut against the Fire on the road off the bench for about half an hour. And then could he potentially start this coming weekend? I think it's definitely, there's a shot at that. And then Thomas Müller, for example, joining the Whitecaps. He's finally there now after a couple of weeks since the signing was announced, and he'll be available this weekend against the Dynamo. Abou Ali for the Crew finally got his visa. He'll be available against Toronto, and so many other storylines and really just honestly good matchups for the league this coming weekend. So going to get you previewed on everything you need to know with lineups, expectations, and my personal predictions, and a couple of best bets in there. Before we get into all of that, guys, please make sure to like this video down below and subscribe to the channel as well if you're new here or haven't already. We're rapidly approaching 500 subscribers, and I'd love to hit that mark as we continue to grind through the end of this season and as we get into the Leagues Cup knockouts, which of course I'll have content for that in the coming weeks. So if you're enjoying this content and MLS, please make sure to show some love, and I really appreciate your support, guys. To start the slate, it's Charlotte hosting RSL, and Charlotte with Pep Biel has been injured for a couple of games now, and he's going to be out for still about a month with a hamstring injury, and that's a big loss for them, as he's of course the main creative piece there. They were running Zaha in the 10 last game against Cincinnati. It ended up working out primarily because Cincinnati got a red card late after Kalina just stood on his head all game and showed that goalkeeper of the year type of form or performance that has kind of been lacking most of this season, truthfully. But that's also been partially due to Charlotte's fall off defensively overall. And so they're coming off a really good win on the road at Cincy, where Zaha did score, but still Biel injured, and I'm not really sold on this attack without him. And on the other side, RSL with their best player by far out in this one because Diego Luna suspended. He was given a second yellow on a tackle that, he wasn't the one who fouled the other player for the Red Bulls. He was given that second yellow, and then he got fined for not going off the field in a timely manner or something like that. And that red card didn't get rescinded, even though it was clear that he wasn't the one who, did any wrong there. So they'll be without Luna. And they've made a couple of signings at the striker position. They signed Olatunji from Sparta Prague, and his name's slipping my mind. I think it's Cruz from Botafogo or someone like that. And they've I think Cruz has been the only one that's gotten a little bit of runtime so far. But it's really hard to trust RSL without Luna anyways, on that main creative spark. They've been one of the better teams, honestly, in the past couple of months of the season. They've played a lot of weaker teams, though, and Charlotte at home, despite their terrible road form this year, has been, of course, a bit of a fortress. And so I think Charlotte should be favored here, but I'm not particularly convinced, like I said, without Biel in this lineup, about the upside of this attack. And yeah, I just don't really see where the goals will come from, on either side of things. But I do have to give Charlotte the slight edge. It's just not a game I'm particularly interested in watching. But Charlotte should have more of the ball here than they did against Cincy, where they were just kind of, completely pinned in and kind of a bit lucky to even stay in that match as late as they did before they eventually won it, because since he probably should have scored a couple of goals, but Kalina, once again, like I said, just played out of his mind, had that kind of game. So Charlotte, that's the kind of performance, I guess, that can turn your season around, especially after Zaha and those comments where he was talking about, how fans complain about his robotic or his lashing out or being emotional. He's not going to be a robot and just not react. So he's bringing that passion to Charlotte at the end of the season, and let's see if they can kind of build momentum off that Cincy win. I'm going to back them to win here 1 or 2-0. Because they still have Vargas, and I like him, and they're primarily healthy, outside of BL. But I think it's going to be an ugly win. But Charlotte should probably just have enough. Moving on to an Eastern Conference battle, it's Montreal hosting DC, and truthfully, neither of these teams with much to play for. Like I said, under 10 games remaining now here, and these teams both at the bottom of the conference. They're 17 points off that play-in spot, the 9th spot at the moment, and with a maximum of 28 points remaining, let's be serious, it's not going to turn around. They haven't made any moves, and they're just kind of both vibes teams to end this season, and they're playing each other here. They're both relatively healthy, and for me, if I were to bet this game at any angle, it would have to be taking either Owusu and or Benteke to score, because both have been, well, especially Owusu has been Montreal's entire saving grace this whole season. His goal scoring form is unbelievable. Regardless of the injuries they've had in the lineup throughout the season, he's just a constant. He puts in a shift. Benteke, he's gotten back to some health. He hasn't scored in a couple of games, and for both, I just feel like both are licking their lips here, and both have a great opportunity to get on the score sheet. And the result here really is kind of meaningless, because it's not going to propel either towards any type of push realistically. And so it's one that, for a neutral, really isn't all that entertaining. But so it's really hard to call a result. I think, goals could be on the cards, but there's no real motivation here. As especially DC as a organization at the moment just isn't in a great spot. Of course, both these teams fired their coach this season, but DC most recently. And so once again, kind of a game that's hard to call, pointless to kind of try and predict. But both strikers are in a great position to do some damage here. And so while I don't have an official best bet for this game as far as the scores go, since I don't usually do that, outside of like some fun parlays or something like that, I think, couldn't blame you for taking either of these goal scorers, because, I mean, who else is really realistically going to score for either of these teams? The only one I could think of is Pirani for DC getting involved. But it's going to go through the main guys up top, and other than that, stay away from this game, in all honesty. Next up, it's a cross-conference clash. The Revs host LAFC. The Revs still in range to potentially make a push at the, play-in spots in the East. LAFC kind of building positive momentum from Leagues Cup despite not advancing through the knockouts, because in their final game they beat Tigres with an ultra-rotated lineup. And then, of course, the signing of Heung-min Son, and he makes his debut. They end up coming back twice to tie 2-2 at the Fire. And now they have another road game here at the Revs, who have been honestly abysmal the second half of the season. After having about a multi-digit unbeaten streak, they were on a multi-digit winless streak. And they just kind of corrected that by beating, of course, a really bad DC United. So that's not saying much at home. And their home form hasn't been good whatsoever. Meanwhile, LAFC, could Sonny start his first game here after playing 30 minutes last week? I think it's entirely possible, but I'd love to see if they're going to play him in a striker role or what, because currently Abobasi is dealing with an injury. You have Martinez, who of course can play on the right, and then Ordaz, who's been honestly a really serviceable striker. But of course, this back line has been really weakened for LAFC for some time now, but they've been kind of getting by in MLS play, that is. And it's one that I think LAFC should be winning. But without Sonny starting, or I just really don't know who will be sacrificed, right, in terms of the positional spacing and where they want to actually try and fit Son in, because Bawang is going to be on the left, and that's where Sonny is best. But he can obviously shift a little bit, but it's honestly about who gets that priority, I guess, right? So we'll see if they still maybe ease him in with another bench appearance, maybe like 45 for this game, and then he makes his true debut at home, because I feel like that's a more likely thing. But the Revs are also healthy. Campana picked up a bit of a knock last game, and once again, their home form hasn't been great. I'm going to favor LAFC here, probably with or without Son, to get this one done. But I just really don't trust that defense at the moment. So it could be they could have a hiccup in there, give up a goal. I'm going to go for a 2-1 LAFC win. Moving on to the Red Bulls hosting Union. And these two teams, it just feels like a bit of deja vu, because about a month ago or so, they were scheduled to play in the Open Cup quarterfinal in Philly, and had a meeting directly after that in Philly, and that got postponed. And then earlier this week, or yesterday at the time of this recording, Wednesday, they played that rescheduled Open Cup game in Philly, where there was another delay due to storms, but it did get played. And then Philly, it was a crazy game. Philly came back from twice going down within 5 minutes of each of those Red Bulls goals, and then eventually won in normal time with a very late goal, 3-2, to advance to the semifinal, where they'll face Nashville. And once again, right after that, here these two teams meet, but it's going to be at where the Red Bulls play. And I think the stat was that the Red Bulls haven't beaten Philly. There's been some draws in there, but the Red Bulls haven't beaten Philly since about 2019 or something like that. And yeah, it was honestly, Philly was favored in that game, being at home, being that they're, of course, here first in the East. They have a very strong lineup, but they tried their best to make that slip away. And the Red Bulls, of course, fought very hard, and that midfield can really put in a shift sometimes, but they just collapsed when it mattered. And Philly, a couple of Philly signings, including Iloski, who is now switching allegiances after San Diego didn't want to pay him, scored in that comeback. And, now it's a bit of rotation involved as well, because Philly didn't really rotate from last weekend's match going into Open Cup. The Red Bulls did. And so Forsberg and Choupo-Moting really only got half an hour, so they'll probably start here. But Choupo-Moting also picked up a knock last game, so it's hard to say whether he even features at all. And Philly will probably, should be rotating here, but they still have good depth. But they'll also be missing Glesnes since he's on a suspension, so that's why they kind of had that extra boost for the Open Cup, because he was able to put in a full shift there despite playing on the weekend as well, knowing that he's suspended here. So it's one that's, I think, hard to call because of those factors. Philly's not going to be full strength despite being, of course, the better team. But the Red Bulls have been one of the best teams at home all season, and they actually have the most goals at home scored in MLS this season. They've had a couple of really, of course, lopsided scorelines that have helped that. But there's no denying they're, really, really good at home. And despite, maybe some on paper bad looking lineups, they kind of do put the pressure on teams at home. So this could be an opportunity to avenge that immediately after the Open Cup loss, but also, of course, they're going to be really, really frustrated. So I think they should honestly get a result here. I think they can definitely break that streak considering all those factors, but I'm just staying away from it personally as far as a bet or anything, because the Red Bulls haven't been kind to me personally, and the Union will be over-rotated. They've done their business. It's clear they're, if they slip up here, it's not too big of a deal. Yes, they slipped up against Toronto, and Miami has 3 games in hand, which if they won all of those would tie them on points right now with Philly for first in the East. But there's still a decent amount of games to go, and they've done their job now. They've clearly were prioritizing Open Cup, so I'm not going to be I'm not going to overreact from this match if Philly weren't to, get a result out of it in any case. So I think despite all of that, Red Bulls can get the win here. They'll be they'll have the stronger lineup. And yeah, we'll see if they can, bounce back immediately. It's a good opportunity for them since they get to play them right away. Moving on to a cross-conference battle with two teams in very different positions at the moment. Orlando hosting Kansas City. Orlando has been on fire at the moment. Coming out of Leagues Cup, they still are in it due to unbelievable performances. And they've now scored at least 3 goals in the past 3 games, including 2 of those Leagues Cup games, where after losing to Pumas in penalties on the first match day, they beat Atlas 3-1, Necaxa 5-1, and then continue that form in the Battle of Florida, or whatever you want to call that, against Miami, not letting them get revenge, and putting them to the sword, winning 4-1 last weekend. And here they face, a bad Kansas City side, but one that has been stingy on the road, that has not, even in maybe some losses on the road, not been blown out, not made it easy. And they can certainly, steal some points from teams. And this is an interesting spot because Orlando, of course, has to travel all the way to LA next Wednesday for that Leagues Cup quarterfinal against Toluca, which, of course, is an unbelievably difficult opponent. Probably at the moment the favorite to win the whole thing based on just general form. And it's not going to be easy. So will they be maybe a little bit weaker here? Also, Araujo is suspended for this game here. And so we might see a weaker lineup here. And that might make it frustrating for Orlando to, win this game comfortably. So I think Kansas City can keep it close. But once again, it's hard to tell where how intentional they're going to be about, looking ahead to that Toluca game since they have to travel. And, although they've been, of course, one of the hottest teams at the moment on form, on the attack, I don't want to, jump the gun here without knowing a lineup. And also Araujo is a big part of that midfield and being a distributor. So I'm just saying I wouldn't be surprised if Kansas City upsets here. But I'm going to assume they'll probably put out a decent enough lineup. And I'll still take Orlando just here right now to carry on this fine form and carry that into that quarterfinal and win here against Kansas City 2-1. Next up, it's Toronto hosting the Crew. And big storylines for both these teams as Toronto went out and got George Mihailovic from the Rapids after, of course, getting rid of Insigne and Bernadeschi. And they've made a splash. It's probably, likely not going to be enough to make a late run this season. But, of course, their attacking potential just got boosted a lot because now they have a number 10. He can play a little bit wider, too, if need be. And they have a distributor. They have a guy in corners now. He was the Rapids penalty taker. So they have their guy, essentially. And I'm going to, be a little bit higher on them as far as that, potential goes to contribute in games here. And they just played the Union, came back from a very early goal on the road where they could have just kind of sit down and died. And they made some adjustments. They kept it close and then eventually got a late equalizer. And so they're still fighting. They're a little bit closer than some of the 3 teams below them as far as the standings. So there's just the slimmer chance. And they're at home here. And they're facing a Crew team that, as well, is getting their striker who's been signed for weeks now, but has been waiting on his visa, Abou Ali from Al Ali. And he's, primed to be the guy that is going to finish all these chances that the Crew have been creating, because by the numbers, they are still creating plenty of chances. And as you can see from that final Leagues Cup game against Leon, where they needed to up the goal differential. They got plenty of chances through that style of play, but just no killer instinct. The finishing was off, and they have replaced Cucho, so he's going to be available here. Maybe not a start right away, but regardless, I think the Crew as well had a bye last weekend in MLS, so they're going to get a bit of extra rest here. And I just like both teams' attacking potential. The Crew have also been a bit of a slippery slope defensively. They're kind of hard to trust. Schulte has made some mistakes as well. And so for the first best bet here, I'm going to take both scoring over 2.5 at plus 105. I think the odds are very solid. I'm going to take my chances on this one. And I think Toronto at home especially, they get the home bump. They've gotten Mihailovic. And whether Abou Ali starts or not, his team still has great, of course, it has good attacking phases, and we'll see as well if Sean Johnson comes back from a bit of a knock because he was out last game, and so that could also even be another factor as to why this game sees goals. So I like the potential here, and I'm gonna take Toronto to be just a little bit better, enough that they can contribute in this one, and the Crew probably win this one 2-1 or something along those lines. Moving on to Miami hosting the Galaxy, and Miami got completely outplayed at Orlando coming out of Leagues Cup. Meanwhile, the Galaxy just as well got bounced by Seattle at home 4-0 after, of course, a great Leagues Cup, and that's what has put both these teams in the quarterfinals. Miami will host Tigres, while the Galaxy will host Pachuca on the following Wednesday after this weekend's slate. And so for the Galaxy, it's clear where their intentions lie. They're prioritizing Leagues Cup. Ricky Puig has posted another kind of cryptic post that he could potentially be returning early in some fashion for the team as they begin the Leagues Cup knockouts. And realistically, right, this team only has 9 games left. They're sitting on 16 points, and they only have 3 wins so far this season. All of those 3 wins have been at home. And now you have Garces as well out, their best center back, who's really good at, tracking back when they get caught out through the lines, through that back line. And he's a speedster. So that's another factor here as to why I think Miami can bounce back and, be the team that gets back into good enough form going into that quarterfinal, while both teams looking ahead in a sense, but the Galaxy, of course, I think will rotate a little bit here, and just having to travel back for that midweek game. I think Miami at home especially is, always a good bet to score, to contribute. Whether or not they can hold up their end of the bargain defensively, we'll see. But that's why I'm going with for the second best bet. It's going to be a 2-legger. The first leg, I'm going to take Miami on the team total over 1.5. And it's pretty simple. Obviously, no Messi, but DePaul has joined. Say what you want about Suarez, but he's, it's not like he hasn't been contributing. And, of course, it's a pretty open and shut case as far as what this lineup's going to look like. Even though, of course, they have that midweek game to look ahead to. I just think the Galaxy's defense is terrible on the road, and they just cannot be. Obviously, their entire season lies on Leagues Cup compared to Miami, which has, many things to be fighting for, and especially at home, they have to be the favorites. And of course, I don't want to trust the defense either. So they should need 2 here anyways to win, but I'm not. I'm just gonna take them to, trust them on the attacking side of things, and. The Galaxy are a terrible team, so I'm going to fade them. I think it's the right situation, and I think Miami wins this one 2-1 or 3-1. I just don't think the Galaxy are going to be, I think they've accepted that, the season, of course, MLS-wise is over, so they should not really be all that competitive here. I wouldn't be surprised if the Killer Peas, or one of them at least, doesn't start this one. Moving on, the Fire host St. Louis, and the Fire not able to hold on for a win at home, which has been a very common theme this season. They're probably the best road team by the attack, especially in the league. But at home, they especially are overly leaky and result-wise are just not able to hang on to leads. And that was the case, right, against LAFC, where they fumbled 2 leads. And when it was 2-1, had a very, very good chance to put the game away, but Zinkernagel hit the post. And regardless, though, him and Bamba are in top form. Bamba with that amazing goal to make it 2-1. And then Tehran as well. He's recovered from an injury previously in the season, and he looks unbelievable as far as tracking back and making some great tackles. Obviously gave up the penalty late, but he also scored on a corner. And this Fire team, we know, are good for goals one way or another. They're actually going to be playing once again at SeatGeek Stadium, their former home, not at Soldier Field like it shows here on the graphic. But regardless, they had a good turnout last game, and regardless of where they play, that attack is primed for goals. But of course, defensively still leaking. And St. Louis City has been on the up and up as far as that attack the second half of this season since they made the manager change. But Klaus seemed to pick up a knock last game. Tykert as well didn't play. And so they're kind of questionable, still dealing with some issues. But regardless, they still have, I think, a pretty fine attack at the moment, a fine approach. And the Fire have only held a few clean sheets this entire season. So to pair that with the Miami total, I think to take over 2.5 here and get at plus 102, I think is a fine bet. It's just by the metrics, by the numbers, Chicago should probably be the one leading the way in this one. But they're very unreliable defensively. It should be a back and forth game either way. And I don't think, once again, that those knocks to the St. Louis players are going to really be too big of a deal. But I think one or maybe even both will recover. So we're going to juice it down just a little bit. Maybe be a little bit less risky. And, I think it's a very solid play. So I think the Fire win this one. I think they correct some of this terrible home form. They're in a really important battle right now to remain in those bottom East spots. And the points separating like 10th through 7th or 6th right now is I think they're only 6 points off Miami at the moment as well, who's in 6th. So anything's possible. They're fighting for points, and they have to start getting some home results towards the end stretch of the season. So I think the Fire will overly be committed to, not just accepting even. They could get this themselves, I feel like, because as well, they love to get out on the break. But they've also been very patient and well-controlled in possession. So once again, over 2.5 to pair that with Miami team total. Fire should win here, but, St. Louis as well, I think will contribute. Next up, it's a Texas derby with Austin hosting Dallas. And there's, of course, been a lot of those this season between these teams and also their matchups with the Dynamo. And Austin still sitting in that final true playoff spot at the moment. Meanwhile, Dallas sitting 6 points off. This is an important match. And once again, we're getting into that time of the season where, points really do matter. And maybe some games won't be as open, especially with these teams that are very limited offensively. And we know, of course, that Austin is that. And, of course, with Vasquez out for the year, that takes away a big goal-scoring threat. Uzuni has been in form recently, but I'm not going to be tricked by their most recent results. I'm taking the under 2.5 in this. The line is 2.75, which I think is just too high. I'm going to take the straight under 2.5. I think it's great odds for an Austin team that, of course, a great percentage of their games go under this mark. And especially on Dallas's end, Lucho Costa left to go to the Brazilian league if memory serves me right, on where he went. But he's gone. And yes, they did win their last match, 2-0, I believe it was. But this offensive, that 10, that creation is gonna take a great dip. And Dallas, of course, neither of these teams honestly really able to possess the ball a lot. And in possession, especially Austin being on the front foot at home here, maybe they have the slight advantage. They maybe pull this one out slightly and get the goal to win, but they are just lost in terms of that in possession chance creation, connecting, making runs at the right time. Like, it's just, and of course Dallas has been one of the better teams on the road this season, but once again, it can't be overstated that that loss of Lucho is gonna damage this team's potential at making a run late. So of course they still have Musa. Farrington's been a bit of a bright spot, and Santos, but it seems like one of those two, Santos and Pedrinho, is always like dealing with some injury or issues, and so I think it's good value here. Austin is just not an overs team. Dallas is, but both these teams just don't create much. So, unless it comes on corner set pieces, unless Austin gets an early one and then can implement that kind of counterattack where that's really their only hope of getting out into space and creating some chances. I just don't see many chances created in this game, and I'm going to take the value here. I think, especially down the end stretch of the season, Austin's going to be ultra desperate maybe, but still, games are going to be tighter, and Austin kind of excels in those situations, but that and winning those 1-goal games, but that doesn't mean it's going to get into 3-goal territory, in my opinion. And I think now's the time to start taking some Austin unders. Moving on to Minnesota hosting Seattle. And when these two teams met in Seattle earlier this season, Minnesota and that tactical way they play, it won out, and they comfortably won against Seattle in that one. And I do expect it to show again here, as third and fourth in the West do battle. For the fourth best bet, I'm going Minnesota on the money line, plus 120. Minnesota just slipped up against the Rapids. The Rapids, of course, losing Mihailovic, also kind of changed their lineup up a little bit, playing with a bit of a back three. And Minnesota struggled and then got caught out late. They tried to mount a comeback, but it wasn't enough. And they were also just a bit coming off that, that Leagues Cup, stretch of games where it's just extra games, extra, run. And here they get a normal bit of rest. They get to stay at home. Meanwhile, Seattle has been in amazing form, yes. Obviously, they're in the Leagues Cup quarterfinals. So they have a look. This is a bit of a look-ahead spot where they're on the road here, and then they have to go back home to face Puebla, who, of course, has been not a great Liga MX team, but has been no pushover in this tournament to get to this point. And once again, Seattle in great form, winning all 3 of its Leagues Cup games, including that 7-0 against Cruz Azul, and then beating the Galaxy this past weekend 4-0 on the road. But they have suffered some pretty impactful injuries, and their depth as a result has taken a hit. So they can't really, especially with that look-at spot, they're not going to be fielding a strong enough lineup here, I think, to deal with Minnesota. With Rusnak now going to be out for about a month. He's a big creative piece. And then also Kent, who, they signed, and he's going to be out more long-term, about, I think it's like 3 months, which could be basically the rest of the year, if Seattle doesn't, make a insanely deep run. And by that point, he probably won't even be, you know what I mean? So he's essentially out for the year. And you have Jordan Morris as well out for the year with that surgery. And so they're very limited here. It's probably going to be De La Vega, Ferreira, Musovski, Rothrock as that front four. And Fry still, he's been available after that long time being out since the concussion. But he hasn't gotten back yet. So we'll see if he starts here. But I just think Minnesota being at home, they have enough. And it's a pretty valuable price against this Sounder side that is going to be very limited, have a look-ahead spot, and want to obviously perform in that tournament. So obviously form matters going into this, but there's other things to take into account. And Minnesota is going to be full strength here, a bit more getting back on that normal schedule. Meanwhile, the Sounders, of course, since they're still in this tournament, have to deal with this extra congestion. So I'm going to take Minnesota to do the double over the Sounders in this one. The Rapids host Atlanta in a cross-conference battle, and honestly, not a lot to like in this one, not a lot to talk about because the expectations are honestly unknown as far as what the Rapids are going to be the rest of these last 9 or so games. They're sitting in 8th at the moment in a playoff spot, but it's very, very congested in that area of the standings. Meanwhile, Atlanta, it seems like the hole is too big at the moment to climb out of. They only have, 4 wins on this season, and especially on the road, right? I think it's still 0 wins. So also with the Rapids, like we've talked about, Mihailovic is gone, huge creation piece gone. They did pick up a huge win on the road against Minnesota, and we'll see if they continue to play with his back three, if that was more of an approach against Minnesota, or how Chris Armas kind of simply sets up his team the rest of the way. Maybe playing Yapi and Navajo together at some times. But also Atencio and Ronan out in this one. So that's a big hit to that defensive midfield and this entire midfield in general. But meanwhile, Atlanta's isn't really convincing either. So this game could go honestly any way. Colorado at home, sure, an advantage, but I think just it's both these teams in some really bad states at the moment, and it's hard to trust either. Atlanta, TRA is out for Atlanta. Latte probably starts. Saba has been in a bit of good form after having just obviously an awful season as a result of this Atlanta attack just being terrible altogether. But he had a good Leagues Cup. Maybe he can carry that form over into this one. But yeah, hard to call a result here. It can truly go any which way. This is just one we will have to learn from, I think. More so on the Rapid side of things, how they approach this final season push. To close out Saturday's portion of the slate, Evander returns to Portland with Cincinnati. The Timbers sitting in 6th. Meanwhile, Cincy in 2nd, just 2 points off the Union at the moment. And if results go their way, can climb up to 1st in the East. So Denke as well, he did technically come back last game against Charlotte, but he only played 3 minutes or whatever plus added time. And, we'll see. I mean, he has been a bit of a workhorse earlier on in the season, but I think, it's doubtful that he starts, and their striker situation in general has been very unreliable. Outside of him, Kai Kamara hasn't really been as electric as he has in his other previous kind of stints, since of course he's been on almost like half the teams in the league. But yeah, the Timbers have made a bunch of great signings with Valde getting Carballo, who used to be on the Red Bulls last season, and then also now another midfielder in Rojas, who used to be on Miami. So, but all those players still, the first 2 not getting their visas yet. I think the third with Rojas, the deal still being finalized. So not able to feature yet. It's going to be more of the same lineup as we can expect. Anthony's gotten back to health, so that's a big boost for this Timbers side. And they've been relatively almost perfect at home. I think only just the 1 loss this season. And Cincinnati, once again, of course, everything's run through Evander when it's come to overperforming. They're kind of pretty average at best attacking metrics. And so this is one where he can maybe steal the show, and it's going to be a rowdy game. I think as a neutral, of course, it's going to be a fun watch to see his return, because there was a lot of drama surrounding his exit last year. Of course, came to Cincy after Lucho Acosta got traded away to Dallas. And so, yeah, Cincinnati not in the best form either because they are coming off a game that they should have taken advantage of and won against a Charlotte team that was out. Pep Biel ran Zaha at 10. And like we talked about at the beginning of the show in the Charlotte preview, you know, Charlotte completely stole that game. So Cincinnati in a bit of a same situation as the Crew right now as far as just maybe creating some decent chances, but outside of Evander and the most random Orejano kind of banger, who is also dealing with a knock from last game. He had to be subbed out. We'll see if he comes in. Other than that, it's hard to expect the Cincy team to be overly capable of scoring multiple goals. And, I think it's going to be a very tight battle here with maybe like a 1-1 where either team maybe steals it late. And if Evander is the one to do that, that would be a great storyline. But yeah, this is one to just enjoy and watch and see whether or not, I guess, Cincinnati can bounce back. We'll see if Denke features an actual, maybe a half at minimum or at most in this one. If he does get considerable minutes, I think Cincinnati's chances, of course, have to go up, and they can definitely compete a little bit more in this one. Here we start Sunday's 3-match slate, and it begins with NYC hosting Nashville in this Eastern battle. NYC holding on to one of those lower playoff spots. Nashville, of course, a very good team in the East this season. And NYC ended Leagues Cup well, beating Leon, but they were one of the two teams who, including the Crew, who hasn't played since Leagues Cup wrapped up, since they had a bye last weekend. And Nashville didn't play in Leagues Cup at all, so they had a extended break, as well as about a dozen teams as well did in MLS that didn't feature. And in their return against St. Louis, a surprising loss on the road to St. Louis, got under it early, tried to come back. Mukhtar scored a penalty goal, and then I think it was Bunbury who scored a second, and we were on that with the Nashville team total, and the goal got taken away due to a very questionable foul call on the goal. And I think Nashville, this in the end, the scoreline could have been a lot closer than what it was. But regardless, Nashville didn't come back from the break all that hot, and they didn't have Zimmerman in that game. And, he's dealing with a knee injury, I think it is. So that's a bit concerning. But we'll see. I think it's kind of a week-to-week thing or day-to-day thing. And, whether or not he plays here is honestly questionable. So that's a big loss for them. Of course, they are, of course, much worse off without him. When he's back in that back line, they're a bit more reliable to hold some clean sheets. But especially on the road here, I think Nashville can, of course, contribute in the attack. But defensively, especially if Zimmerman doesn't play, it's going to be tough. And NYC, Fernandez, their new kind of number 10, he's been fitting in well, playing in the Leagues Cup. And especially at home, they get a pretty decent boost. And, of course, Alonso Martinez is a killer. So I think this can be a sneakily good game for goals. And I could honestly go either way with how Nashville has responded, especially if Zimmerman's out. But if I were to take anything in this one, it would be that. And it would only have to be it would have to be a lineup check for me. As far as if Zimmerman, if he doesn't play, then I'll probably be looking at the over in this one. But yeah, I think either team takes this one 2-1. I'm going to say, it kind of does lie on Zimmerman. It's hard to beat NYC, with their home field advantage they have. So I think Zimmerman does start, though, bounces back. And in that case, of course, I'll take Nashville to just edge NYC. But the other way around, yeah, I'm going to take NYC. I think he's that meaningful to this Nashville team. But I just think it's going to be hard for either of these teams to keep the other off the score sheet. So, yeah, 2-1 either way. Next up, it's a Western Conference battle. with a California clash, the first of its kind, I believe, as I don't think these two teams met in San Diego. And it's going to be the Quakes hosting San Diego. And the Quakes, although they haven't had the best home record, now just getting their fourth win in 13 tries after just beating Vancouver very late, where the Whitecaps had a red card for most of the game. They do have the West's, at least, best home attack as far as goals for, and overall in the league, they're second, just behind the Red Bulls. And meanwhile, San Diego, of course, sitting in first in the West, not first in the Sports Shields, since the Union have, I think, 51 points. But once again, the West's best attack with 26 goals scored in their 12 road games, and overall sitting tied second, with Inter Miami and Chicago being the best road attack overall. So with all that in mind, especially with the fact that San Diego has been dealing with really honestly a kind of a academy slash second string entire back line for the past month or even longer, and with some big hits to that center back depth, and a bit of goalkeeper rotation as well. And San Jose's, of course, really good home attack. I think this game, just at face value, and it shouldn't be overthought, should have goals in it. And the line right now is set at 3.25. And I think it's a good line to attack. Both these teams are going to be on normal rest. San Jose as well is healthy. And San Diego as well. Of course, missing a 9. They've played Valakari sometimes in the false 9. But the wingers get active. Chucky and Dreyer have been contributing. The midfield is finally healthy again. And they're coming off a good end to Leagues Cup. And then they just beat Kansas City on the road 2-0. So, I think it goes 2-1 either way at the minimum, whichever way you look at it. And a fourth goal, I think either of these teams have very good chance to score 2. And I just think the line is a good one to attack as well. Here, with the line being what it is, if it ends with 3, it's only a half loss. And we still need the fourth one. But, I'm not going to, it's just about minimizing the risk, minimizing the losses. And if that's what the line is going to be, so that's what I'm going to take. You can take the 3.5 if you want. It's going to be like basically even or just a little bit plus. But, of course, I expect the fourth goal to come. Either of these teams can score 3 themselves anyways. But I see this as a 2-2 or even better. I think, there just shouldn't be too much to think about with this one. I think the line is just slightly wrong. Should be a 3.5. And, yeah, I'm going to take it. There's just really... both these attacks are on fire. San Diego's defense especially is really, really been bad at holding clean sheets. And the Earthquakes at home just always good to, do the damage. Even if they don't get the results, but they're going to start needing them with this season winding down. And they're sitting in 9th right now. So they're the team that needs to be a little bit more attack heavy with the approach and making sure that they handle their end of the bargain at home. To close out Matchweek 29, Sunday Night Soccer is going to see Thomas Müller get his debut with the Whitecaps finally against the Dynamo. And we'll see. Probably not going to be a start, but, that's just a big story for this league, a big signing. Him choosing to go to Vancouver out of all teams. Of course, they are this season one of the league's best, but they have, in a sense, fallen off a little bit since, of course, the Champions Cup loss. They've been pretty inconsistent, and that defense as well has been, a little bit shaky. Of course, Veselinovic now, he's got injured and is going to be out for the season, and I believe it was Ocampo who got that second yellow against the Earthquakes last match, where they did almost hold on to a point after Brian White tied it late, but then they conceded a late winner to lose. But Ocampo got that red card rescinded, so he'll be available anyways. But also Ali Ahmed and Kubas, who have been Ahmed, who's been out for a while, and Kubas, who seemed to get injured last game, have been fully training ahead of this match. And the thing is, though, that the Whitecaps had the Canadian Championship semifinal first leg at the Forge of the Canadian League, one of the best teams in that league. And once again, a bit of a shaky, display. 2-2 in that first leg. Now, the second leg is not going to be immediately following this or anything like that. They have a bit of a break before that. It's not like just immediate, but still, all that to say that this Whitecaps team has been shaky. They've been giving up goals, home or away. And, this Dynamo team is pretty unpredictable, but I think all in all, they'll probably get in their own way. Ben Olsen has been doing that a lot recently as far as the lineups have been. The Dynamo look healthy, or on paper are healthy, but he's been kind of throwing around some weird lineups the past couple of weeks. And I think it just remains to be seen if they can maybe make a push. I mean, they're only 4 points off the 9th spot at the moment. 7th, Austin has 34 points, and 12th, Houston has 28. So that's 6 spots right now separated by 2 wins. And so, once again, anything is possible for these teams. But once again, the Dynamo have been inconsistent, and they don't really play toward expectations. And they also completely had a great comeback against Austin last time out in that Texas Derby, coming back from 2-0 to tie, with McGlynn getting 2 goals, including a penalty. So, long travel here for Houston. They're a bit of a wild card, but I think eventually, the Whitecaps probably do just have an edge. Müller will probably come on a little bit later. He could be a great spark, but they're also going to be rotating a little bit due to that midweek game. So it could be a little bit tighter, with, I think, the Whitecaps pulling away in the end.